Good evening. I'm the Maven of the Eventide, and welcome back to another Vampire Read-Throughs. It's summer, it's hot, it's gross outside. You don't want to go there, so stay indoors in the dark with me and read vampire books. Tonight, we continue our foray into the original lesbian vampire herself, Carmilla, by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. Last we left off, Laura was telling us all the things she didn't like about Carmilla, amid the things she did like. And the thing she does like is how beautiful Carmilla is. How sweet, how soft, how kind, how beautiful. And did she mention she's beautiful? Laura's been a very lonely girl, and she just wants a friend, just some female companionship, just gals being pals. But one of the things she doesn't like about Carmilla is how gay she acts all the time. She keeps hitting on Laura, flirting with Laura, and Laura is not happy with it. It makes her repulsed and uncomfortable, and she doesn't know how to react. She has some theories because Laura does not know that gay people exist. She thinks either Carmilla is insane or she might be a boy in disguise who's secretly in love with Laura, and that would be very flattering. Laura would like that, but no, she's pretty sure it's not true. And she doesn't know what to make of it. She doesn't know about lesbians. And speaking of lesbians, let's talk about that. So Carmilla as the prototypical lesbian vampire, the one who launched the lesbian vampire trope in cinematic history, certainly in literary history as well, but lesbian vampires were a huge thing in movies, starting in the 60s through the 70s and 80s. Certainly they still exist, but not in such a problematic way anymore. It was a bit of a exploitation film era thing to have the lesbian vampires. And when you have a vampire who is gay and who is unquestionably the villain of a story, you got a bit of a homophobic portrayal of queer people there. Because, as we discussed before, the thing about female vampires is they're always transgressive in some way. They're rejecting gender norms. They're not motherly, they're not docile, they don't want to be housewives, they're like free independent thinkers. How horrible. But Carmilla's way of transgression is through homoeroticism. So she is transgressive in that she is a woman going after another woman, but she's not just a woman in love with another woman and acting on that love. She is deceiving this other woman. She is preying upon her. And using the vampire as this metaphor for the predatory gay person is problematic, because the vampire is your monster, and your monster here is a metaphor for a very real type of person. Yes, anyone predatory is monstrous, but surprise, most gay people aren't. And that there is this stereotype, this stigma that existed certainly in oldie Victorian times when Carmilla was written, and exists to this day, that queer people are predators. That's not something we want to perpetuate. Using vampires as a metaphor for gayness in this negative way, not cool. So yes, Carmilla is a homophobic text. It's still an important text. It's still important to queer people who look for queer representation and lesbian representation, and a lot of people love Carmilla for that. That doesn't mean it's without its problems, and we can analyze it from both sides. We can appreciate it for the lesbians it gave us, and we can call it homophobic for making those lesbians exclusively monsters. This idea of the vampire as this alluring personage, this beautiful person who you want to invite, who you want to put your trust in, and then they betray you by, surprise, I'm gay. I mean, surprise, I'm a blood-sucking monster who's here to kill you. That sense of betrayal is the problem here. That's not to say that you can't find empowerment for your gay self in Carmilla. You absolutely can. There is so much you can read into it. But at the end of the day, if you want good lesbian literature, find some written by lesbian authors. It will serve you much better. In a way, we have Carmilla and the cishet white man who wrote it to thank for giving us a gateway to future lesbians that weren't homophobic. So, sure. And as for vampire tropes, a very important one. So far, we've gotten a lot in here that Bram Stoker certainly borrowed from Dracula. And even though it was Dracula that eventually made those vampire tropes popular and into the pop culture consciousness, the fact that they stem from Carmilla and, as we discussed before, stemmed from Polydori's The Vampire. It's good to go back and revisit these older texts, these pre-Dracula texts, and just see where all these ideas started. And Carmilla, as we've also discussed last time, is making fun of Varney the vampire a little bit, that very pulpy portrayal of vampires, and giving us a much more complex, nuanced, deeper, mysterious vampire to explore. We have also seen that Carmilla is a bit of a reluctant vampire. She does not like that the people she kills die. She doesn't like being faced with that consequence of her natural vampire actions. She's conflicted about it. She doesn't think death should be a big deal. She's like, so what? You die. It happens. No big deal. And yet she doesn't want to see it. She doesn't want to hear it. It bothers her. So we got some layers there. Last we left, more local women were dying. It seems Carmilla is only interested in preying on women. Part of that could be just because she's gay and, they're not going to stray from that. Or part of it could be that the author couldn't envision men as victims here. Make of that what you will. But more women are dying. Laura's father doesn't take it seriously. He doesn't need to worry. All the peasants are talking about vampires. He's like, "Paw, superstition, I don't believe it." But even the very learned doctor, who our very smart heroine Laura likes, so we know he must be a good doctor, is like, could be something to this vampire talk. Could be, mysterious thing happened. God is mysterious. But Laura's father, not even listening. Carmilla has hinted that Laura is special, that Laura is different from the victims that she's making of the peasants, because she doesn't think of peasants, that maybe she wants to make Laura into a vampire, that Laura will die in some metaphorical metamorphosis way. She compares it to caterpillars and butterflies. Laura, of course, doesn't realize this, except for her very few fourth wall breaking asides, because she has written this 10 years later. It actually happened, that if only she had known the horror at the time. Where we pick up Chapter 5, A Wonderful Likeness. This evening there arrived from Gratz the grave, dark-faced son of the picture cleaner, with a horse and cart laden with 2 large packing cases, having many pictures in each. It was a journey of 10 leagues, and whenever a messenger arrived at the Schloss from our little capital of Gratz, we used to crowd around him in the hall to hear the news. This arrival created in our secluded quarters quite a sensation. The cases remained in the hall, and the messenger was taken charge of by the servants till he had eaten his supper. Then, with assistance and armed with hammer, ripened chisel, and turnscrew, he met us in the hall, where he had assembled to witness the unpacking of the cases. Carmilla sat looking listlessly on, while one after the other the old pictures, nearly all portraits, which had undergone the process of renovation, were brought to light. My mother was of an old Hungarian family, and most of these pictures, which were to be restored to their places, had come to us through her. My father had a list in his hand from which he read, and the artist rummaged out the corresponding numbers. I don't know that the pictures were very good, but they were undoubtedly very old, and some of them very curious also. They had, for the most part, the merit of being now seen by me, I may say, for the first time, for the smoke and dust of time had all but obliterated them. "There is a picture that I have not seen yet," said my father. "In one corner at the top of it is the name, as well as I could read, Marcia Karnstein, and the date, 1698, and I'm curious to see how it has turned out." I remembered it. It was a small picture, about 1.5 feet high, and nearly square, without a frame, but it was so blackened by age that I could not make it out. The artist now produced it with evident pride. It was quite beautiful. It was startling. It seemed to live. It was the effigy of Carmilla. "Carmilla, dear, here's an absolute miracle. Here you are, living, smiling, ready to speak, in this picture. Isn't it beautiful, Papa? And see, even the little mole on her throat." My father laughed and said, "Certainly it is a wonderful likeness," but he looked away, and to my surprise seemed but little struck by it, and went on talking to the picture cleaner, who was also something of an artist, and discoursed with intelligence about the portraits or other works which his art had just brought into light and color, while I was more and more lost in wonder the more I looked at the picture. "Will you let me hang this picture in my room, Papa?" I asked. "Certainly, dear," he said, smiling. "I'm very glad you think so like. It must be prettier even than I thought it, if it is." The young lady did not acknowledge this pretty speech, did not seem to hear it. She was leaning back in her seat, her fine eyes under their long lashes gazing on me in contemplation, and she smiled in a kind of rapture. And now you can read quite plainly the name that is written in the corner. It is not Marcia. It looks as if it was done in gold. The name is Mircalla, Countess Karnstein, and this is a little coronet over it, and underneath AD 1698. I am descended from the Karnsteins, that is, Mamma was. Uh-huh, said the lady languidly. So am I think, a very long descent, very ancient. Are there any Karnsteins living now? None who bear the name, I believe. The family were ruined, I believe, in some civil wars long ago, but the ruins of the castle are only about 3 miles away. How interesting, she said languidly. But see what beautiful moonlight! She glanced through the hall door, which stood a little open. Suppose you take a little ramble round the court and look down at the road and river. It is so like the night you came to us, I said. She sighed, smiling. She rose, and each with her arm about the other's waist, we walked out upon the pavement. In silence, slowly, we walked down to the drawbridge, where the beautiful landscape opened before us. And so you were thinking of the night I came here? She almost whispered. Are you glad I came? Delighted, dear Carmilla, I answered. And you asked for the picture you think like me to hang in your room? She murmured with a sigh. She drew her arm closer about my waist and let her pretty head sink upon my shoulder. How romantic you are, Carmilla, I said. Whenever you tell me your story, it will be made up chiefly of some one great romance. She kissed me silently. I'm sure, Carmilla, you have been in love, that there is, at this moment, an affair of the heart going on. I have been in love with no one and never shall, she whispered, unless it should be with you. How beautiful she looked in the moonlight. Shy and strange was the look with which she quickly hid her face in my neck and hair. With tumultuous sighs that seemed almost to sob, she pressed in mine a hand that trembled. Her soft cheek was glowing against mine. Darling, darling, she murmured, I live in you, and you would die for me. I love you so. I started from her. She was gazing on me with eyes from which all fire, all meaning had flown, in a face colorless and apathetic. Is there a chill in the air, dear? She said drowsily. I almost shiver. Have I been dreaming? Let us come in. Come in. You look ill, Carmilla, a little faint. You certainly must take some wine, I said. Ah, yes, wine will cure all your crazy talk. Yes, drink wine. Good choice. Yes, I will. I'm better now. I shall be quite well in a few minutes. Yes, do give me a little wine, answered Carmilla as we approached the door. Let us look again for a moment. It is the last time, perhaps, I shall see the moonlight with you. How do you feel now, dear Carmilla? Are you really better? I asked. I was beginning to take alarm, lest she should have been stricken with the strange epidemic that they say has invaded the country about us. Papa would be grieved beyond measure, I added, if he thought you were ever so little ill, without immediately letting us know. We have a very skilled doctor near this, the physician who was with Papa today. I'm sure he is. I know how kind you all are, but, dear child, I'm quite well again. There is nothing ever wrong with me but a little weakness. People say I am languid. I am incapable of exertion. I can scarcely walk as far as a child of 3 years old. And every now and then a little strength I have falters, and I become as you have just seen me. But after all, I am very easily set up again. In a moment I am perfectly myself. See how I have recovered. So indeed she had. And she and I talked a great deal, and very animated she was, and the remainder of that evening passed without any recurrence of what I call her infatuations. I mean, her crazy talk and looks, which embarrassed and even frightened me. Yes, Laura, yes, you're so embarrassed when Carmilla's like, yes, I will be in love with you and no one else, and you will die for me, because you immediately say how beautiful she looked in the moonlight, instead of like, whoa, gross, weird. Laura did start from her, and that made Carmilla back down. So, mixed messages from Laura here, but she does say earlier that she gets into this kind of trance when Carmilla's talking to her, where she does start falling for it. So maybe it's that. If you want to read that Laura's actually into it, you can. If you want to read it as the evil vampire influence that this author is trying to make us believe is evil, you can read that. I don't believe that the author was trying to show that romance between two women was a good thing in this book. So I personally don't read that Laura's into it. I believe that Laura is being tricked, as is authorial intent. Reclaim Carmilla. Make it gay. So Laura gets scared by this talk from Carmilla when Carmilla says, "Darling, darling, I live in you and you would die for me. I love you so." That's a very famous quote from Carmilla. You should have it tattooed. Laura starts from her, and then Carmilla's immediately like, "What was I just saying? I don't know what I'm just saying. I'm talking crazy talk. Maybe I should have some wine. Everything's fine. Look at me. I'm normal again." So Carmilla realized that she overstepped that bound. She backed down, covered her tracks. They're good for now. But Laura, who's a smart girl, is left a little embarrassed and frightened. Yet she still wants this picture that looks exactly like Carmilla, down to the mole on her neck, hanging in her room, because she does love her bestie so. And, knowing that Carmilla is a vampire who is older than she looks, we can believe that this picture from 1698 or whatever was actually a picture of Carmilla. This Countess Mircalla Karnstein. One and the same. But Carmilla doesn't even react to having her cover almost blown. She's just like, "Oh yes, it's my ancestor. I'm a descendant." And here we find out that Laura is also a descendant of the Karnsteins. Probably not a descendant of Carmilla herself. Carmilla doesn't give any indication that she had any descendants, but of the same family, they are kind of related. That earlier scene when Laura was like, "Why are you talking to me like you're in love with me? Are we cousins?" Because that would explain it. Maybe they are. And that would also explain why Laura is special to Carmilla. Why Carmilla tried to come and take her when Laura was 6 years old, failed, and has now come back now that Laura is a grown 19-year-old woman to try to have this romance with her. That Laura is different than all the other girls. She's not a peasant like the village girls. Peasants mean nothing to Carmilla. Laura's special. Which makes it so scary. Poor Laura, the victim. Now, 10 years later, she thinks on horror of all this. Not happy. Don't take this as a romance, because if you did, you would be wrong. And queer people have never clung to such romances because we have absolutely nothing else or anything. I like that this story actually has the words "her crazy talk," as ableist as that is. It's not a term that you usually think you see in old-timey books like this. Chapter 6, A Very Strange Agony. So something about the word strange. In this era, strange was a code word for gay. When you talk about strange love, it was a euphemism for queer love. And the word strange has come up several times in this book. And it's used here, a very strange agony. So agony is also a euphemism for like erotic feelings, orgasmic feelings. So to have this chapter be a very strange agony, you've got this euphemism for gay, this euphemism for orgasm in here. It's even then people might have not picked up on it, but knowing how it's been analyzed since, it seems pretty hilariously obvious. So sexy and transgressive for its time. But there occurred that night an event which gave my thoughts quite a new turn, and seemed to startle even Carmilla's languid nature into momentary energy. When we got into the drawing room and had sat down to our coffee and chocolate, although Carmilla did not take any, she seemed quite herself again. Hey, what about the wine? I was promised wine. Well, coffee and chocolate's pretty great too. Though why you're having coffee at this hour of moonlight? You young people. And Madame and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine joined us and made a little card party, in the course of which Papa came in for what he called his dish of tea. When the game was over, he sat down beside Carmilla on the sofa and asked her, a little anxiously, whether she had heard from her mother since her arrival. She answered no. He then asked whether she knew where a letter would reach her at present. "I cannot tell," she answered ambiguously, "but I have been thinking of leaving you. You have been already too hospitable and too kind to me. I have given you an infinity of trouble, and I should wish to take a carriage tomorrow and post in pursuit of her. I know where I shall ultimately find her, although I dare not tell you." "But you must not dream of any such thing," exclaimed my father to my great relief. "We cannot afford to lose you so, and I won't consent to your leaving us, except under the care of your mother, who is so good as to consent to your remaining with us till she should herself return. I should be quite happy if I knew that you heard from her, but this evening the accounts of the progress of the mysterious disease that has invaded our neighborhood grow even more alarming. And my beautiful guest, I do feel the responsibility, unaided by advice from your mother, very much. But I shall do my best, and one thing is certain, that you must not think of leaving us without her distinct direction to that effect. We should suffer too much in parting from you to consent to it easily. Thank you, sir, 1,000 times for your hospitality, she answered, smiling bashfully. You have all been too kind to me. I've seldom been so happy in all my life before as in your beautiful chateau, under your care and in the society of your dear daughter. Carmilla's such a con artist. She's like, oh, you've been so good to me, I should probably go. And they're like, no, don't go. And she's like, oh, if you insist, I'll stay and keep killing the village girls. So he gallantly, in his old-fashioned way, kissed her hand, smiling and pleased at her little speech. I accompanied Carmilla as usual to her room and sat and chatted with her while she was preparing for bed. Do you think, I said at length, that you will ever confide fully in me? She turned round smiling, but made no answer, only continued to smile on me. You won't answer that? I said. You can't answer pleasantly. I ought not to have asked you. You were quite right to ask me that, or anything. You do not know how dear you are to me, or you could not think confidence too great to look for. But I am under vows, half so awfully, and I dare not tell my story yet, even to you. The time is very near when you shall know everything. You will think me cruel, very selfish, but love is always selfish. The more ardent, the more selfish. How jealous I am, you cannot know. You must come with me, loving me to death, or else hate me and still come with me, and hating me through death and after. There is no such word as indifference in my apathetic nature. Now, Carmilla, you're going to talk your wild nonsense again, I said hastily. So Carmilla's going on about how she will tell Laura everything, and we know everything means, hey, I'm a vampire, I drink blood, I'm immortal, I don't age. And Laura will think Carmilla very cruel and selfish when she finds this out, but love is always selfish, and she says, you will come with me, loving me to death, death being the metamorphosis into a vampire, or you'll hate me through death and after. So Carmilla plans to make Laura a vampire, whether Laura's going to love her or hate her, and get into the I hate you vampire dad trope. But she's going to do it because Carmilla is not indifferent. It's either love or hate, all or nothing with this girl. And then Carmilla backs down again, changes the subject. Not I, silly little fool as I am, and full of whims and fancies. For your sake, I'll talk like a sage. Were you ever at a ball? No. How you do run on. What's it like? How charming it must be. I almost forget. It is years ago. I laughed. You're not so old. Your first ball can hardly be yet. I remember everything about it, with an effort. I see it all, as divers see what is going on above them, through a medium, dense, rippling, but transparent. There occurred that night what has confused the picture and made its colors faint. I was all but assassinated in my bed, wounded here, she touched her breast, and never was the same since. Were you near dying? Yes, very. A cruel love, strange love, that would have taken my life. Love will have its sacrifices. No sacrifice without blood. Let us go to sleep now. I feel so lazy. How can I get up just now and lock my door? So Carmilla says that the night of her ball was the night she became a vampire. Someone tried to assassinate her in her bed right here, the same spot where Laura was bitten as a child by Carmilla's 2 sharp needle fangs. And she was very near dying, but she didn't die. Love will have its sacrifices. It would have taken her life, but she lived through blood. She uses that word again, strange, a strange love. And strange love together means gay love. In the idioms of the oldie times, that was the word they used. So a lot of people like to think that the person who turned Carmilla into a vampire was a male vampire. And then Carmilla maybe rebelled against that by seizing her female power, which ties into her lesbianness. But the fact that this word here, strange love, makes me think that it was probably a female vampire. And this ties back into the homophobic themes of this book, that being gay is monstrous. So this female vampire bit Carmilla, turned her into a vampire, and also turned her gay at the same time, because to become a vampire is to become the monster, is to become gay. And now Carmilla is preying on Laura the same way by emotionally manipulating her and wants to turn her into a vampire the same way with all her talk of, I will tell you everything soon, and you will come with me and die and live with me by dying. Metamorphosis, butterflies, maggots. But then Carmilla immediately changes the subject again. Enough about that. I feel lazy. It's bed. I don't want to get up and lock my door. She was lying with her tiny hands buried in her rich, wavy hair under her cheek. Her little head upon the pillow and her glittering eyes followed me wherever I moved, with a kind of shy smile that I could not decipher. It's a gay smile, Laura. That's the smile. I deciphered it for you. You're welcome. I bid her good night and crept from the room with an uncomfortable sensation. Yeah, see, Laura, again, feels uncomfortable with this talk of love and stuff from Carmilla. And, Carmilla's saying some weird things too, like, my first ball was so long ago. Ha ha ha, but Carmilla, it couldn't be because you're so young. But Laura's a smart girl. She picks up on these things. She's not a ditz. She's thinking about it. Uncomfortable. And also uncomfortable with the gay. And a lot of people like to read that Laura is returning Carmilla's attractions. She does have gay feelings herself, but is uncomfortable with that because it is societally taboo, and she thinks she shouldn't. So I could see that reading too. But based on the fact that the gay is monster here, and I know Le Fanu had that theme in mind, I don't think that that's really what's going on. But a lot of reimaginings of Carmilla like to think, well, what if? What if it wasn't homophobic? What if Laura did have feelings for Carmilla? What would that be like? And those are interesting. Perfectly valid. Reinterpret Carmilla however you want. These vampires are our lesbians. I often wondered whether our pretty guest ever said her prayers. I certainly had never seen her upon her knees. In the morning, she never came down until long after our family prayers were over, and at night she never left the drawing room to attend our brief evening prayers in the hall. Well, Carmilla already implied that she has a different religion of you. Don't be so judgmental, Laura. Maybe she doesn't like praying. It's okay. You don't have to think less of her for that. It's a very vampire thing to, not pray. It's another sign that, she's not the sweet, normal girl she appears to be. If it had not been that it had casually come out in one of our careless talks that she had been baptized, I should have doubted her being a Christian. That's the only reason. Religion was a subject on which I had never heard her speak a word. If I had known the world better, this particular neglect or antipathy would not have so much surprised me. Oh yeah, if I had known that there are lots of people out there that didn't like Christianity, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal. The precautions of nervous people are infectious, and persons of a like temperament are pretty sure, after a time, to imitate them. I had adopted Carmilla's habit of locking her bedroom door, having taken into my head all her whimsical alarms about midnight invaders and prowling assassins. I had also adopted her precaution of making a brief search through her room to satisfy herself that no lurking assassin or robber was ensconced. Well, now that you've found out that she was assassinated in her bed after her first ball and almost died, can you blame her for having these paranoid fears? It's a good cover story. Yeah, it works. And now Laura's doing it in her own room, which, sure, keep yourself safe. Why not? These wise measures taken, I got into my bed and fell asleep. A light was burning in my room. This was an old habit of very early date, in which nothing could have tempted me to dispense with. Thus fortified, I might take my rest in peace. But dreams come through stone walls, light up dark rooms or darken light ones, and their persons make their exits and their entrances as they please, and laugh at locksmiths. I had a dream that night that was the beginning of a very strange agony. Again, that word strange and that word agony together, so sexy. I cannot call it a nightmare, for I was quite conscious of being asleep, but I was equally conscious of being in my room and lying in bed, precisely as I actually was. I saw, or fancied I saw, the room and its furniture just as I had seen it last, except that it was very dark, and I saw something moving round the foot of the bed, which at first I could not accurately distinguish. But I soon saw that it was a sooty black animal that resembled a monstrous cat. It appeared to me about 4 or 5 feet long, for it measured fully the length of the hearth-rug as it passed over it, and it continued toing and froing with the lithe, sinister restlessness of a beast in a cage. I could not cry out, although, as you may suppose, I was terrified. Its pace was growing faster, and the room rapidly darker and darker, and at length so dark that I could no longer see anything of it but its eyes. I felt it spring lightly on the bed. The two broad eyes approached my face, and suddenly I felt a stinging pain as if two large needles darted an inch or two apart deep into my breast. I waked with a scream. The room was lighted by the candle that burnt there all through the night, and I saw a female figure standing at the foot of the bed, a little at the right side. It was in a dark, loose dress, and its hair was down and covered its shoulders. A block of stone could not have been more still. There was not the slightest stir of respiration. As I stared at it, the figure appeared to have changed its place and was now nearer the door, then close to it. The door opened, and it passed out. I was now relieved and able to breathe and move. My first thought was that Carmilla had been playing me a trick and that I had forgotten to secure my door. I hastened to it and found it locked as usual on the inside. I was afraid to open it. I was horrified. I sprang into my bed and covered my head up in the bedclothes and lay there more dead than alive till morning. So as we'll find out, this creature that is haunting her nightmares is Carmilla, the vampire. She has the power to turn into a giant black cat. It's only the word cat used, but I'm picturing like a panther. You know, that kind of big cat, 4 or 5 feet long. And then when she bites her with the needle teeth and she screams, the scream always seems to stop the vampire's attack for some reason. I don't know why the other woman didn't scream. Now, there's a dark female figure at the foot of her bed. She doesn't recognize it as Carmilla. She just says a female, doesn't know who it is, and then it kind of like teleports, opens up the door, goes out the door, but the door is still locked from the inside. So creepy. The fact that this vampire opens the door and uses the door is interesting too. It makes Carmilla as a vampire, as a female vampire, more of this intimate physical presence than a lot of the male vampires that came before were, or since. A lot of those vampires, you know, they can turn into mist and phase through things, but Carmilla is this very fleshy presence. It's very close to Laura, and she feels so much more real, so much more intimate. This vampire has worked her way into Laura's life, worked her way into her heart, and that deception, that betrayal, when she finds out she's a blood-sucking creature of the night, is going to be that much more horrifying. Chapter 7, Descending. See, now I'm reading all these chapter titles as euphemisms. Is this like a metaphor for going down on someone? Probably not. It would be vain my attempting to tell you the horror with which, even now, I recall the occurrence of that night. It was no such transitory terror as a dream leaves behind it. It seemed to deepen by time and communicated itself to the room and the very furniture that encompassed the apparition. I could not bear the next day to be alone for a moment. I should have told Papa, but for 2 opposite reasons. At one time, I thought he would laugh at my story, and I could not bear its being treated as a jest. And at another, I thought he might fancy that I had been attacked by the mysterious complaint which had invaded our neighborhood. I had myself no misgivings of the kind, and as he had been rather an invalid for some time, I was afraid of alarming him. Oh, Laura, you're doing that British thing again. You're like, you know, this couldn't possibly be the same attack that happened to all the other girls, you know. It happened to them, but it couldn't possibly happen to me. I have no misgivings about that. My father would, because, you know, it's logical and it makes sense, but I was comfortable enough with my good-natured companions, Madame Perrodon and the vivacious Mademoiselle La Fontaine. They both perceived that I was out of spirits, and at length I told them what lay so heavy at my heart. Mademoiselle laughed, but I fancied that Madame Perrodon looked anxious. By the by, said Mademoiselle, laughing, the long lime tree walk behind Carmilla's bedroom, is it haunted? Nonsense, exclaimed Madame, who probably thought the theme rather inopportune. And who tells that story, my dear? Martin says that he came up twice when the old yard gate was being repaired before sunrise and saw the same female figure walking down the lime tree avenue. So he well might, as long as there are cows to milk in the river field, said Madame. I dare say, but Martin chooses to be frightened, and never did I see a fool more frightened. You mustn't say a word about it to Carmilla, because she can see down that walk from her room window, I interposed, and she is, if possible, a greater coward than I. A vampire that's a coward of a ghost on a walk. Which the ghost is obviously Carmilla out doing vampire things. But, you know, good cover story, Carmilla. You're even more afraid than Laura of ghosts. No one will ever suspect you now. Carmilla came down rather later than usual that day. I was so frightened last night, she said, so soon as we were together. And I am sure I should have seen something dreadful if it had not been for that charm I bought from that poor little hunchback whom I called such hard names. I had a dream of something black coming round my bed, and I awoke in a perfect horror, and I really thought for some seconds I saw a dark figure near the chimney-piece. But I felt under my pillow for my charm, and the moment my fingers touched it, the figure disappeared, and I felt quite certain, only that I had it by me, that something frightful would have made its appearance and perhaps throttled me as it did those poor people we have heard of. Well, listen to me, I began, and recounted my adventure, at the recital of which she appeared horrified. And had you the charm near you? She asked earnestly. No, I had dropped into a china vase in the drawing room, but I shall certainly take it with me tonight, as you have so much faith in it. So Carmilla is doing that thing again where she pretends to have the same exact dream as Laura, even though she was just doing the thing Laura dreamed, in order to get Laura to do what she wants. At this distance of time, I cannot tell you or even understand how I overcame my horror so effectually as to lie alone in my room that night. I remember distinctly that I pinned the charm to my pillow. I fell asleep almost immediately and slept even more soundly than usual all night. Next night, I passed as well. My sleep was delightfully deep and dreamless, but I wakened with a sense of lassitude and melancholy, which, however, did not exceed a degree that was almost luxurious. Well, I told you so, said Carmilla when I described my quiet sleep. I had such delightful sleep myself last night. I pinned the charm to the breast of my nightdress. It was too far away the night before. I am quite sure it was all fancy, except the dreams. I used to think that evil spirits made dreams, but our doctor told me it's no such thing. Only a fever passing by, or some other malady, as they often do, he said, knocks at the door, and not being able to get in, passes on with that alarm. And what do you think the charm is? Said I. It has been fumigated or immersed in some drug, and it is an antidote against the malaria, she answered. Then it acts only on the body? Certainly. You don't suppose that evil spirits are frightened by bits of ribbon or the perfumes of a druggist's shop? No. These complaints wandering in the air begin by trying the nerves and so infect the brain, but before they can seize upon you, the antidote repels them. That, I am sure, is what the charm has done for us. It is nothing magical. It is simply natural. I should have been happier if I could have quite agreed with Carmilla, but I did my best, and the impression was a little losing its force. For some nights I slept profoundly, but still, every morning I felt the same lassitude, and a languor weighed upon me all day. I felt myself a changed girl. A strange melancholy was stealing over me, a melancholy that I would not have interrupted. Dim thoughts of death began to open, and an idea that I was slowly sinking took gentle and somehow not unwelcome possession of me. If it was sad, the tone of mind which this induced was also sweet. Whatever it might be, my soul acquiesced to it. I would not admit that I was ill. I would not consent to tell my papa or have the doctor sent for. Carmilla became more devoted to me than ever, and her strange paroxysms of languid adoration more frequent. She used to gloat on me with increasing ardor, the more my strength and spirits waned. This always shocked me, like a momentary glare of insanity. Ah, yes, she's talking gay. She must be crazy. Without knowing it, I was now in a pretty advanced stage of the strangest illness under which mortal ever suffered. Strangest again. It's the gayest illness of all, being preyed upon by a vampire. Of course it is. There was an unaccountable fascination in its earlier symptoms that more than reconciled me to the incapacitating effect of that stage of the malady. This fascination increased for a time, till it reached a certain point, and gradually a sense of the horrible mingled itself with it, deepening, as you shall hear, until it discolored and perverted the whole state of my life. So every night she goes to sleep, she sleeps really well, really deep, maybe because she's got this drugged talisman right by her face and the drugs are affecting her. And Carmilla was like, oh, you should put it by your pillow so you don't have weird dreams anymore. And sleeping really well, but every morning she wakes up and she's weak feeling, almost like something was sucking out her blood all night. But she doesn't want to tell her dad because she doesn't want to admit she's sick because she's doing that British thing again. The first change I experienced was rather agreeable. It was very near the turning point from which began the descent to Avernus. Oh, Avernus! I love Avernus! Avernus is the Latin name for the lake that Hades or Pluto has at the entrance to the underworld. And you have to cross Lake Avernus or Averno or Averne, depending on what language you're speaking, to get to the underworld. And I like Avernus because the Phantom of the Opera, pun master that he is, named the lake in the cellar of the Paris Opera House Avernus because he fancies himself a Hades figure, and you have to cross that lake to get into his underworld. So Laura's mentioning Avernus here because she is talking about the descent to Avernus, the descent to the underworld, the descent to death. She's dying. She didn't realize it at the time because it kind of felt good to be dying. She was kind of digging it, this languid feeling that she didn't want to give up, clearly under the evil vampire's influence. But now things are turning worse. Certain vague and strange sensations visited me in my sleep. The prevailing one was of that pleasant, particular cold thrill which we feel on bathing, when we move against the current of a river. By bathing, she means swimming. This was soon accompanied by dreams that seemed interminable, and were so vague that I could never recollect their scenery and persons, or any one connected portion of their action. But they left an awful impression and a sense of exhaustion, as if I had passed through a long period of great mental exertion and danger. After all these dreams, there remained on waking a remembrance of having been in a place very nearly dark, and of having spoken to people whom I could not see, and especially of one clear voice, of a female's, very deep, that spoke as if at a distance slowly, and producing always the same sensation of indescribable solemnity and fear. Sometimes there came a sensation as if a hand was drawn softly along my cheek and neck. Sometimes it was as if warm lips kissed me, and longer and more lovingly as they reached my throat. But there the caress fixed itself. The caress of the lips are fixed on her throat. I don't think these are dreams after all, Laura. I think someone's molesting you while you're in your drug sleep. My heart beat faster, my breathing rose and fell rapidly, and full drawn, a sobbing that rose into a sense of strangulation, and turned into a dreadful convulsion in which my senses left me, and I became unconscious. It's a very orgasmic description of getting your blood drawn out. It was now 3 weeks since the commencement of this unaccountable state. Well, she's lasting longer than the other girls. They died after a week or 2 weeks. My sufferings had, during the last week, told upon my appearance. I had grown pale. My eyes were dilated and darkened underneath, and the languor which I had long felt began to display itself in my countenance. My father asked me often whether I was ill, but with an obstinacy which now seemed to me unaccountable, I persisted in assuring him that I was quite well. In a sense, this was true. I had no pain. I could complain of no bodily derangement. My complaint seemed to be one of the imagination or the nerves, and horrible as my sufferings were, I kept them with a morbid reserve very nearly to myself. It could not be that terrible complaint which the peasants call the upire, for I had now been suffering for 3 weeks, and they were seldom ill for much more than 3 days, when death put an end to their miseries. Oh yes, therefore it couldn't be a vampire. It's not like you're the special someone to the vampire or anything, No, not you. Carmilla complained of dreams and feverish sensations, but by no means of so alarming a kind as mine. I say that mine were extremely alarming. Had I been capable of comprehending my condition, I would have invoked aid and advice on my knees. She means by praying to God, not anything sexy. The narcotic of an unexpected influence was acting upon me, and my perceptions were benumbed. I'm going to tell you now of a dream that led immediately to an odd discovery. One night, instead of the voice I was accustomed to hear in the dark, I heard one, sweet and tender, and at the same time terrible, which said, "Your mother warns you to beware of the assassin." At the same time, a light unexpectedly sprang up, and I saw Carmilla, standing near the foot of my bed, in her white nightdress, bathed from her chin to her feet in one great stain of blood. I wakened with a shriek, possessed with one idea that Carmilla was being murdered. I remember springing from my bed, and my next recollection is that of standing in the lobby, crying for help. Oh, Laura. A ghostly voice that's speaking to you in your haunted dreams tells you your mother from the great beyond is trying to tell you, beware of the assassin that's eating you every night. And you wake up and you see Carmilla standing there with blood coming down from her face to her dress, and you're like, oh no, Carmilla's being murdered. You sweet little girl. Madame and Mademoiselle came scurrying out of their rooms in alarm. A lamp burned away on the lobby, and seeing me, they soon learned the cause of my terror. I insisted on our knocking at Carmilla's door. Our knocking was unanswered. It soon became a pounding and an uproar. We shrieked her name, but all in vain. We all grew frightened, for the door was locked. We hurried back in panic to my room. There we rang the bell long and furiously. If my father's room had been at this side of the house, we would have called him up at once to our aid, but alas, he was quite out of hearing, and to reach him involved an excursion for which none of us had the courage. It's a big house, pretty gothic, pretty huge. Servants, however, soon came running up the stairs. I had got on my dressing gown and slippers meanwhile, and my companions were already similarly furnished. Recognizing the voices of the servants in the lobby, we sallied out together, and having renewed, as fruitlessly, our summons at Carmilla's door, I ordered the men to force the lock. They did so, and we stood holding our lights aloft in the doorway, and so stared into the room. We called her by name, but there was still no reply. We looked round the room. Everything was undisturbed. It was exactly in the state in which I had left it on bidding her good night. But Carmilla was gone. Where, oh, where has Carmilla gone? Is she off doing vampire things, or was she being murdered? Was the warning about Carmilla herself... You poor naive thing, Laura. No, you beware the assassin, Laura. Whatever will happen next? Join us again next time as we continue reading Carmilla here on Vampire Read-Throughs. Until then, good night and pleasant dreams. For joining me here on Vampire Reviews, where we're doing vampire read-throughs temporarily during quarantine. We are about halfway through the story of Carmilla so far. I hope you're enjoying it. But think about what we're going to read next. Give me your suggestions. Public domain only. They have to be public domain stories. We don't want to get sued here on Vampire Reviews. If you don't have any suggestions, leave me a comment telling me what you like about the story at all. What do you think the ghostly voices are that she keeps hearing in her dreams? Is it Carmilla? Is it the other vampires? Is she being transported to some kind of fae world where there's like stuff going on? So mysterious. And most of this isn't explained later in the story, so your speculations are valid. Special thank you to my Patreon patrons for funding these videos. They would not exist without you. If you like reading vampire books and you want to read vampire books with me, consider joining my Vampire Book Club on Discord. The link is in the description of this video. Join us for reading vampire books. We discuss one book a month on Discord and in a live stream. It's fun. Read more vampire books. What else are you gonna do?